There's on November 3rd at 6:30, there's a Zoom meeting. About that's for people who serve on zoning boards. And it's a really good Zoom meeting. It's the same one we do every year, right?
Pretty much.
Yeah, and I take it every year. Who is that?
Good evening and welcome to the October 11th, 2022 Zoning Board of Appeals regular monthly meeting for the Village of Austin. Just to note that this is a public hearing that is quasi judicial, and as such, I want to remind those in the building and those in person of the in-person rules, as well as the rules to those using the Zoom platform. We ask that no one speaks in the audience. If you have something to or need to say to discuss, we ask that you please take it outside the room and down the hall toward the front door. If you talk outside the conference room doors, your conversation will echo back into the room. When you come up before the board, you must provide your name and address. Remember, you are addressing the board and you are not speaking to an applicant or their representative. Applicants and representatives, please remember you are addressing the board. We are using a hybrid format and the public will continue to have the opportunity to see and hear the meeting live through Zoom and provide comments during the appropriate time. In order to participate, please do the following. Members of the public attending online via the Zoom app may use the raise hand feature at the appropriate time. If you would like to make a comment, the feature is located at the bottom of the screen. Those attending via telephone can press *9. The meeting host will see that your hand is raised or that you have pressed *9 and will unmute those waiting one at a time so that you can speak. Comments can also be emailed during the public hearing on planning director Jaime Martinez at jmartinez, that's JMARTINEZ @villageofaustining.org. The meeting will be recorded and a transcript of the meeting will be available at a later date. There are a couple of ground rules. In order to keep this meeting orderly and to ensure we get a clear recording, please follow these ground rules. When you're given access to speak, please state your name and your address. If you are speaking during the public hearing, please limit your comments to the matter which is the subject of the hearing. And lastly, if any speaker is inappropriate, they will be immediately cut off and access removed. We are now coming up to our roll call.
Marlene Chu,
Present.
Kyle Everizik, present. Bob Duran,
Present.
Olga Montez,
Present.
Michael Smith. Present. And we are,
Also with us are Joseph Agaspinelli, our building inspector, Jaime Martinez, our planning director, Jamie Kane, our board secretary, and Linda Whitehead, our land use attorney. So let's get started.
yeah, if you can, so everybody, we really need everyone to try to speak up as loud as you can. We have recording is actually taking place on the camera over there. So sometimes it can be a little challenging to hear. It would be helpful to speak into this because that at least creates a louder sound due to the speaker. But do try to enunciate as much as you can.
First on our agenda for tonight is the approval of the minutes from the September 13th, 2022 meeting. Has everyone had a chance to look at the draft of the September meeting? Yes. May I have a motion to approve the September meeting?
So moved. Kyle.
Second, Bob.
Marlene Chu,
Aye.
Kyle Everizik. Aye. Bob Duran.
Aye.
Olga Montez,
Aye.
Michael Smith. Aye.
Minutes approved. Thank you very much. Next on our agenda is ZBA 18/20/22 at 24.5 William Street. Maria Shilagawa. The applicant is seeking an area variance for side yard and combined side yard setbacks for construction of a rear yard covered deck.
Yeah, so the applicant is essentially, they're coming back to us in 2019. They received a variance to extend the back of the property. While they were doing construction, they built another porch on the back of the property. So it's uncovered, it's covered but not sort of enclosed, porch, pretty straightforward. And, I believe maybe I can get in. I'm not sure.
Raise your hand if you're the applicant on this matter, and Jaime will let you in.
Is there anyone here to speak on this matter?
Maybe this. Hello, usuario de Zoom? Can you unmute yourself?
Ahí es María Chillogalli.
Okay, ¿tiene el arquitecto contigo?
No,
No, okay. Okay. They are here, obviously. ¿Hablas inglés o solamente español?
solo español.
Okay. ¿Estás bien? Si yo puedo hablar con el grupo sobre la aplicación?
Sí,
Okay. So I asked him if it's okay for me to speak about the application. So I'll tell you a little bit about it. The applicant is here today. As I mentioned before, the building is, as you see right here, it's essentially been already built. So we do have pictures of what it's gonna look like. I'm gonna pull that up real fast. If you can see that. I'm not sure if it's here or if it's on the. Okay.
If we have a
Yeah.
picture of it in our packet,
Yeah.
guys.
So you can see it here. Yeah, that's right. This is the front of the house. This is the rear of the house. That's probably the best view of it, of what it looks like now. Over here. So again, while they were doing construction on the property and, building it and rehabbing the rest of it, they added this little porch here, covered porch. Not super, different, I think, from what you see in other parts of the village. The details, you can see a little bit better here in the actual property. So, this is the original dwelling and was added on in the rear in 2019, and that's when they received approval to do that piece.
Just the second story addition.
Yeah, it was the second,
Yeah.
with partial first story and a full second story addition. So they, and the wood deck that they added is right here, and so you can see we asked to get the four corners of the roof deck. It varies from being about 3.1 feet to 3 feet, 2 feet, and 1.9 feet on each side.
Question. The footprint of the porch isn't wider on either side than the rest of the house, right? It stays in the same.
No,
So
Right.
the only thing that they're looking for is an extension of the same variance that they have for the rest of the house.
It's slightly different because the house is a little bit skewed to the property line.
But essentially,
Yeah,
they're,
they went straight back.
they're asking for what they already have, just a little bit more of.
correct, correct. And so you can see it's actually pretty deep property. So even from this point, it's still about 67 feet from the back of the property line. This is, I believe, this is S75 district, which requires 30-foot setback. So it's more than double what's required, still pretty far back, but again, the property itself is pretty skinny. So there's very little growth for any kind of building on this property other than sort of front and back.
Question, does this have to go before the architectural review board as well?
It does.
So even if we go through the steps tonight, we can't really approve this.
You actually, they can't do theirs without.
You
utility.
can.
We do, so we would approve it pending approval from them.
You could just approve the variance, and they still have to get, before they get the permits in the CO, they still have to get
Got it. Okay.
architectural.
This helps.
And may I have a motion to open the public hearing?
Motion to open the public hearing. Second. Okay, this guy's empty chairs today.
So how
Is there a
many
second to opening?
Yeah,
Oh, like,
Oh,
Okay, all in favor?
All right,
Any votes? No. All right,
is there anyone in our Zoom to speak, from the public?
nope, there's nobody here from Zoom. I did not receive any emails regarding this. Looks like right now, let me see if there's any further emails. Since we've been sitting here. I do not.
Have I entertain a motion to close the public hearing?
so,
Seconded, Olga.
Any opposition? No?
Motion carried to close the public hearing. This is an area variance. Just to be clear, we know it's a side yard. Both side yard.
Yeah.
Okay, so can we just make sure that we have the numbers of the side yard?
Yeah. So let me pull that, information up. So the.
I didn't have enough.
I'm on my 3 cups already. Okay, so the zoning board will need to consider whether to grant a variance to the 8-foot minimum side yard and 20-foot minimum side yard setback. So presuming that the distance on one side yard is 3 feet, that's as good as it gets, then you're gonna need a 5-foot single side yard setback. The maximum combined side yard would be 4.9. So that's the shortest side. So that would require.
5 and 5.
Yeah, so
It's
50,
like the back is 5.
okay,
We do 5 and 5.
okay, so 5, then
Make it-
you're gonna need a 5, you're gonna need a 5-foot variance and a 15-foot combined side yard setback.
So,
If I may.
Yes.
Apologize, I have a question.
Yeah.
The picture that you're looking at says 24.5 billion street,
that is.
but we're looking at 10 Everett.
No, that's
Nope,
not funny.
never is the next
Okay.
project.
My project.
Similar project.
Very
So, you wanna go through?
And I have one more question. I think Mike, like this fall here, the concrete block patio is, we're not looking at that, right? That's an existing structure.
It's a grade.
Great, okay, gotcha.
It doesn't require. setback. Okay. An undesirable change will be produced in the character of the neighborhood or a detriment to nearby property has been created by the granting of the area variance.
I would say no, Kyle, because we haven't heard from anybody, so we don't know their opinion, but also it's in line with their neighbors.
I agree with Kyle. It doesn't change anything. And it's similar to what's going on in the neighborhood, already in the neighborhood.
It's also in the rear of the building, so it's not, there's no sight from the front or the street side of the property, and it doesn't affect the overall, coverage of the land. So, the whole, there's more backyard than there is front of the story.
And I would just add the point that it doesn't extend any closer and the, go straight back to the existing.
Agreed.
Benefits sought by the applicant can be achieved by some method feasible for the applicant to pursue other than an area variance.
Really is no land in order to achieve the same benefit.
Yeah, no.
I would say yes, but it's not a big deal because you could just have a smaller porch that wouldn't need a variance.
But to do it without any variance, it would be a very,
Very small, it'd be a landing.
yeah.
It was,
So again, that doesn't satisfy the benefits sought.
Right.
Right, the requested area variance is substantial.
I would say, 15-foot combined side yard is relatively substantial, but the lot size is small, so, I don't think it's determinative. I mean, I would.
Not when you look at the totality.
Totality of the.
I like that word, substantial, but not determined.
You know, just looking at the property now, it's almost,
It's a long, narrow
like,
process.
yeah, it
Yeah.
may be 25 feet wide.
Yeah, it's
But
very
it's not
narrow.
Very narrow lot.
Yeah,
But you look at the picture, all those lots are very narrow. Now, so it's in the character of the neighborhood.
Proposed variance will have an adverse effect or impact on the physical or environmental conditions of the neighborhood or district.
I would say no, there's plenty of space for runoff and their impervious surfaces below. And have negative impact like that. And I think it said it's not in the wetlands either.
No, there's no wetlands.
No,
The alleged difficulty was self-created, which consideration shall be relevant, but shall not necessarily include granting of the area variance.
Sure, I mean, it is okay, they didn't need, they didn't need to put a deck on.
Really, but it's also created by the narrowness.
Yeah.
Right, it was more created by the narrowness of the lot, and that's something they did.
So again, it's not determined. It's a good strategy.
Okay, so I think now, you know, you take those factors, you consider all of those factors and you balance the benefits to the applicant is weighed against the detriment of the health, safety, welfare of the neighborhood, and you can make your decision based upon those factors.
So based upon the factors that have come before us, it looks like we have granted this,
You have to make a motion
Yes, I'd like to make a motion to grant the variance.
based on,
based on,
on the
on
factors.
the area variance factors that have been before.
Yes.
so moved over.
Second pile.
okay, so we have, need to do like a third
Oh,
actually.
I wasn't thinking.
Okay.
So, okay,
Bob actually made the motion. Although you seconded.
I'm gonna do a roll call real quick. Marlene Keating. Kyle Alvarez.
Hi,
Bob Durayo. Aye. Olga Montes.
Hi,
Michael Stone. Aye. Ok, señor, aprobar.
Sí,
Sí, aprobar. El variance.
ok, gracias.
Ok, en la mañana llama a la oficina para hablar sobre la aplicación de los next steps, ok?
Ok, gracias.
Ok, gracias.
Dígales a todos que muy agradecido.
Thank you very much.
You'll, tell them don't do anything else before coming to the board first.
La doña dice que no hace nada más antes de que está aprobado. Por favor,
Oh.
ok?
Oh, no va a ser nada más, de eso sí, ya aprendí la lección.
Ok, gracias. Dice
Gracias.
Okay.
No.
All right.
no
We like the
less
pillows.
through you.
Thank you so much.
Ok, gracias.
Next on our agenda is 10 Everett Avenue, ZBA 19-2022. Riviero and Son LLC as the owners. The applicant is seeking variances for side yard setback, combined side yard setbacks, and extending a non-conforming use more than the permitted 10%.
And building height and stories.
Are we doing this application because it wasn't noticed for the fourth variance request?
That's correct.
Yeah, we.
So does this have to be adjourned?
Yes.
I don't think they noticed the third
It
story.
Need to be renoticed. I don't know,
Yes, sir.
since everybody's here and if the applicant's here, if you want to let them sort of make their presentation, see if you want any additional,
So they can make their
Information from them.
presentation, but this will need to be adjourned.
because
Yeah.
it needs to be
Yeah.
renoticed, because there's some additional.
Okay. So let me explain, because there was a conversation that we had when we were doing the agenda, reports. Essentially, the property, is in a zone that requires 2.5 stories maximum, and at least 36 feet. So the height is not the problem. The problem is the 2.5 stories, which essentially means that you can have a third story, but only half of that story can be built on. So imagine like a peak roof where half of the, square footage is available on that third floor. The applicant wants to increase the entire volume of the property so that they'll have a full third floor, which would require a variance to the stories, if not to the height. They'll still be okay with the height.
So they have 2.5 stories.
They have 2.5 stories now.
They're looking to add a half story.
To get
to
to a
make
full 3.
They're looking to make it a full.
Under the way the code works, you do have to notice, for all of the variances that you have. They did not identify on their application that they were requesting that variance, like it specifically said that they were not requesting a third story. So we sort of took that at word, but as we reviewed it further, we realized that they were gonna need that additional variance. And we discovered this on Friday, so, JB is here to talk about the application, but
I noticed in the paperwork that we received today, that the architectural review board has reviewed this and denied it. Is that correct? No, not correct.
the paperwork, can you point out what you're talking about?
Yeah, we got it notice today, that I may be misspoke. It's possible.
I mean, they haven't reviewed, it, so.
Yeah, they haven't.
They have not reviewed it.
No.
I mean, let me see if I can get on here. Because zoning board, maybe
Maybe the needs.
What was added today was a revised, building department referral form that listed the additional variance.
Yeah,
it says, I'm looking at something here. It says, data.
is it a building permit denial form? Is this it?
It's a building permit denial.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So the building permit denial, it goes, it's got a couple names, called a referral letter and it's called a denial letter in various different instances. It's the same thing. So essentially, denial means you can't get a building permit until you do these out here.
So correct. The reason they're here is because of the letter that we got saying that the building department denied it, because it didn't have the variance. Thank you.
they will also need Board of Architecture,
They will be
Right.
awesome.
assuming grant the variance.
Are there any other questions from the board?
Not for me.
So I entertain to the board that we, open this application to the public.
Well, do you want to let the
Yeah,
applicant?
but I'm just asking if they, if they let's open a public hearing and then adjourn it until, it can be.
You want a motion to open public hearing?
No, not yet. I just want to make sure that everybody.
I was trying to understand what you were saying.
I'm just
I've never
asking if
been here
everyone's
for
okay
that
with it.
specific one, so I particularly need to look at the code, make sure I know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, so-
Right, so you're not
So,
gonna
yeah,
make any
there's just-
decision.
We're not gonna
tonight.
make any decisions.
Totally
tonight.
understand.
It's
Totally.
just, since they're here,
They can
it's on the agenda, let them present. That way you can also tell them if there's any other additional information that you might want from them.
I understand.
Efficiency.
Yes, and then we can get up to the public hearing for you.
We'll adjourn the public.
Okay.
Okay,
And JB.
JD Hernandez is here.
So I promoted JB Pence. And I'm gonna stop sharing and allow JB. Hi, JB.
Yep, good evening. With, so if I understand this correctly, with this half story always variance was always there, and then realized that when we did the notice that that was not noticed. Or this is, we revised the denial letter because it's something that has come up. Just trying to, and I mean, either way, we will do the presentation, move ahead, and this does not stop us from going to the architectural review board, right?
Yeah, well, it doesn't necessarily stop you, but the BAR can't do anything until the ZBA does their work. So you'll need to come back next month for both the BAR and the ZBA. We may actually put you off from the BAR till next month. Unless you want to go to get comments, unless you are anticipating some major comments.
Okay.
You can't see me, I'm here, I'm just.
Okay,
But you can go ahead and present.
Yeah,
okay.
and let us know if you can't hear us, if you are having difficulty hearing us, so we can speak up.
No, I can hear. I can't see you, but I can hear you. So you want me to share a screen and go to the presentation?
Yes,
Yes,
please.
please.
Well, this is as the prior lot that you guys, that the board was reviewing. This is a existing non-conforming lot. It's in a two-family zone, but it's a existing non-conforming three-family residence. What we are doing here, this is we showing the two houses adjacent to each other. This is a very narrow lot. The house is, the property is about 5,000 square feet. Again, it was built circa 1900s. It has been expanded towards the rear through the years. As you can tell, the existing footprint is the way it is now. We're not proposing any additional work, which is going to keep the same footprint. What we're doing is, if you see the house, this is Everett Street, this is the sidewalk, this is the front of the building, and this is the second floor. It's a typical layout. There is one apartment per level, but then as you reach the top level, the existing apartment that you see here in red is a very small apartment. It doesn't comply with the minimum 800 square feet, but it's a system non-conforming. So what we are proposing is to, I'm sorry, let me move to the third floor. Is we are revamping the third floor apartment. We're making it larger and in compliance with the code as per apartment size. So this will be, again, under a new roof at the rear of the building. The street elevation is not changing, except for that little peak that is not visible from the street level. On the rear, and you see in the darker shade, is that we'll be adding to the third floor elevation. Again, and this is the side elevation. Right now it's a flat roof, so we add in this level that will be on the rear of the property. And this is the other side. We have a balcony, we have an addition on the rear. So going back to the survey, what we have here, so again, it's an existing 3-foot setback and 7.5, and so that creates the requirement for a variance for setback, and also we need a variance for the increase of the addition, because we increase an existing non-conformity for more than 10%. Going through kind of through the requirements under 27048, this isn't undesirable change. We pointed out that proposes of the work is at the rear of the property. It's an improvement to the current rear and side elevation. We match in the existing materials, and the street view is not changing. As to if this can be achieved by any other methods, no, this is the only area that we can add at the top floor level, and this again at the rear of the property. As to that being substantial, you know, again, we keep in the same footprint. There's no encroachment behind the existing footprint. And the area that we increase in substantially is beyond the 10% allowance, but that creates remedies the existing non-conformity, which is the square footage and habitable space. We believe this will not have any impact on the physical environmental condition of the neighborhood, because at the rear of the property, footprint remains the same, number of bedrooms remain the same, and again, we're not changing the front of the house. As to is this self-created, I mean, this property again was built sort of in 1900. All these lots are very narrow. It's one of the issues that we have very common in downtown. I'm not sure if you have any more questions or if there's something that I can walk you through.
Just to be clear, the proposed, expansion is, I know you said it was greater than 10%, but I think the proposed, enlargement is almost 63%, is that correct?
It's 63% of the rear of the third level apartment. Not of the whole house, of the unit in itself.
Of that apartment.
So the properties in T zone, so two families are permitted. The third family is essentially the use that is the non-permitted use. And he's mentioned, but I'm gonna mention here again, the expansion of that non-conforming use, that third apartment essentially is what they're asking for variance for. And it's currently required to have 800 square foot to be conforming with the size requirements for apartments or units in that district. It's under that now, it's 660, so they're gonna take it up to, I think it was 1,050.
But that's specifically
Yeah.
livable, which we were just discussing in another project. How much, what is the total square feet of that apartment? Not livable, what's the?
So livable is the total square footage, habitable is the space that doesn't include closets and various other things.
Mm,
But habitable does not apply in this, it doesn't have habitable requirements.
But what I'm confused about is to bring one part up to code, which we've seen in other non-conforming uses, we have to give a variance to something else that's no longer, that's gonna now be out.
Because the third unit is not permitted, so the third apartment is a non-conforming use, it's a legal non-conforming use.
I'm just stating
So
that
it's right,
distinction.
in general, you
We're
don't want to
trading
ban.
variances.
Yes,
But
no,
we're
so
gonna
you're not, no, that would not be correct. So what the code does is it allows for legal existing non-conforming uses. Essentially, the uses that are allowed to be there but never received the variance because they proceeded or whatever is determined they're allowed to be there, due to existing a long time ago when
Usually pre-existing zoning.
the code also permits you to enlarge pre-existing non-conforming uses up to 10%. In this instance, increasing that to 10% would only take it a certain way. The variance that you're granting is from the provision that only allows you to do 10%. Instead of doing 10%, you're going up to 63%.
I have a question. There was a picture of a side view of the building with the expansion on it. It looks like the existing roof line isn't going up. Is that correct?
The height is not
The height's
increasing,
not increasing.
right, but he has it on his zoning chart, is that it's still gonna be 2.5 stories, and that's what Joe has determined is not accurate, it's becoming a full third story.
Right, but the triangular shaped roof line there. So essentially, you're filling in behind it. So that looking at it from the front,
It's a slight bit higher, that's what you saw, that little,
yeah,
Yeah.
how much is that? That little?
but
Oh,
it doesn't
that's,
variance, it
Right.
meets the height
It
in
does.
feet,
It does not.
Okay, so,
the height.
So
story.
the height from grade in the front of the building to that portion is 31 feet, 31 and a half feet. So the difference between the two is a couple of feet, but the allowed height is 36 feet. So let me check that.
okay,
Um,
so
it's a good question.
I was actually asking,
I don't know.
Let me pull it up.
I was asking.
I'm gonna stop your sharing. now.
I was wondering if it changed what people would see if they're looking at the front of the house, whether it would change the way that looks compared to the other houses on the block.
Maybe from street level.
Yeah, the street
You're
level.
looking straight
Yeah,
on.
yeah, straight on.
You'd actually, you wouldn't see much other than I think that addition, that roof is just slightly higher than the existing roof there. But you're only gonna see that increase in height at probably about a third of the way of the house back.
It's also-
Yeah, so the maximum building height in the T zone, as you can see, here is 35 feet, not 36 feet. And two
You
and a
see
half-
that, you see that front elevation view? You're just, in the front, you're just seeing that little peak there, that little gable.
Right,
All right.
That was my
but if you're at an
Yeah.
angle, you'll see.
I was gonna say, I'm looking at the street, you'll definitely see it, just not from street.
Right. That's what
not
I'm
from
saying.
the front.
This view will be from the distance or across the street, very, you'll only be able to see this.
You're on the third floor.
So it wouldn't change the character of the neighborhood suddenly having an extra floor. It doesn't look like an extra floor from the street. It just looks like there's a roof.
If you're looking straight
Straight
up.
up.
If you're looking from either side. it does. If
Yeah.
you're looking from the back.
Right, because of what they're filling in that.
They're filling it in.
I think to the eyes of the beholder, but I think if you're looking at the, if you're in front of the building, it looks like a three-story building. After this is done, it will still look like a three-story building. There,
Right.
building next door.
Exactly. It already looks like a three-story. Okay, just check. Thank you.
I don't think most people understand what a 2.5 story building is.
No.
Well, you won't be able to see it that.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm clear.
Is there,
Is this the second house on this block to be 3 stories? There's one house that looks like it has an extension on the. that floor, it's right
Are
here.
you looking at the picture with all the houses?
The aerial.
The aerial? Yeah.
No, I'm not looking at the aerial. I'm looking at the street view.
It's so, if you look at the, you look at the aerial from step forward, you can see that
It's right there.
there is actually property at the edge of this district. And an arrow to everybody, you can sort of see it on the edge of it. It's these doors down, it already has it. And there are other properties that have, for extension right next door, 2 doors down, they haven't said, it's not clear how high they are, but, it's also reasonable to expect that all of these properties were essentially the same size when they were built and have been added on to over time. There's a lot of that.
Is there any
Not
parking
yet.
requirements?
No, the
Okay.
parking requirements are the same, it's worth noting.
Still 3 units, it was 3 units.
Okay.
Still-
Correct. There's no parking we provide now, and there's no parking we provide in the future, but there's no higher legal requirement.
Gotcha.
Is it currently occupied?
JB? That's a good
Excuse
question.
me?
Is it currently occupied,
Yes,
that third story?
yes.
Will
Well,
it
you're
be-
saying occupied, meaning the way it is currently without the addition on it, obviously.
Right, right.
Down.
Small occupied, small apartment.
So what are you gonna do, to the person who's living up there?
Oh, I'm not sure when they're doing the work, I'm not sure what they're gonna be doing that. I mean, they may be changing tenants. Right now, it's a very small apartment, so I'm sure that once they enlarge the unit, that may change. I'm not sure how they're gonna handle that.
So because I don't hear very well. Currently someone's living there. You know, there's no arrangements have been made that if we give them this variance, where those people are gonna have to go while they do the work. And there's no guarantee that they're gonna be able to move back in when it's done. Because obviously the rent will go up and they might not be able to afford it. So effectively, you're displacing a tenant in order to do this. Is that correct?
So,
that may
Uh,
be, that's not appropriate.
yeah,
I'm just.
all right, so I think
Wanting to.
100% correct, that's not your purview, but I would note that, and I got a call, not about this topic, but about another subject, and the person was asking about a potential project that could come forward, and they had, 2 different variance, applications. One would be an application where they would have to encroach on side yard, they would keep those units small, and one where they would encroach on the side yard for a larger area, and those units would end up being, 5-room apartments. And so there are a lot of different ways of looking at creating a very large apartment like that, right? The needs that come with that, there may be special parking needs, there might be all sorts of stuff. But one thing that is true is that, there are a lot of people who need bigger apartments, and there are some people who need smaller apartments. And so even if this individual, and we don't know who's living there, even if this individual needs that apartment, there is certainly somebody who also is just as much needs a bigger apartment that can accommodate more people. There's,
I understand.
larger apartments are at a premium because there just aren't enough of them, right? The amount of people who do need them.
I have a question.
Not saying you should vote one way or the other, but
No.
On the same topic, but from a different angle. For safety reasons, would they be allowed to stay during construction? or is that not our purview?
I would say they're not gonna be able to stay there during that type of construction.
Okay,
Because you'd have to be able, the third floor would be open to the weather elements while the construction's going on.
They
To be
do
able
have,
to make that right.
and if they have a lease, then they have a right to stay as long as their lease is there.
And the applicant may have to wait to do this work until the tenant leaves.
Right.
I mean, you know, not be able to force them out. Okay. For this.
Are there any other questions from the board?
No.
And if there's no other questions from the board, may I entertain a motion? to open the public hearing?
motion to open, Olga.
Seconded, Michael.
Any opposed, any opposition?
No.
None, none. Is there anybody here in Zoom that would like to speak on this application? Please raise your hand. Seeing none, check my email. No emails, not received any letters on this application.
So there is, at this time, no one here to speak on this application. May I entertain a motion to adjourn this application until it can be renoticed and put in it back on the agenda.
So moved, Kyle.
Okay, so
Seconded.
you have, you're adjourning the public hearing?
Yes.
Yeah.
Seconded, Olga.
Okay, any opposition? Seeing none, it's unanimous. Now you're going to need a motion to adjourn.
So may I have a motion to adjourn this application until
So moved. Bob.
Seconded, Kyle.
Any opposition?
No.
None, it's unanimous.
Thank you, Debbie.
No problem. Have a good night.
Good night.
Good time.
Next on our agenda is continuing business of the board, ZBA 14/2022.
Yes, so we have, so the applicants here today, they have, made some progress on getting the fire access bridge across the property, so there was a question about whether or not the design that they had to accommodate fire access to the fire truck was gonna work. We had to get an actual appointment scheduled with the fire truck to come out and do the turns and maneuvers and everything. It was very fun, sent people up in a big bucket, 100 feet in the air.
Yes.
That led to some changes in the design of the property, particularly the parking garage as well as the bridge. They are here today, to just receive some of the final details on the variants that are needed. So you're not gonna be able to vote on these, because we just received some of the final numbers. But they are gonna give you a progress update, so at least you know where things are, with the goal that, you'll be able to come to vote on them at the next meeting.
But, I mean, didn't we vote on certain, variances last time?
Yeah, you just press them.
So we were getting the stuff out of the way.
Yeah, and now some of this.
So some of them have changed, but, you know, they're gonna discuss them. I would argue that none of them have changed in any material way that would change your analysis that you made in the last meeting. There's small modifications, moving the garage over, in a few places, and they will clean up.
This is just for the fire access that they moved it all around.
They made us switch, move some of the parking from under the building into the garage as well.
Yeah.
They'll explain it, they'll show you all the changes.
Who's here to speak on?
There, it takes a minute to let them in.
Yeah, so we have Chris Hahn, we have Jim Wendling, we have Rich Williams, and we have Maxwell Powell.
Familiar faces.
And we have Cuddy and Fader, so we finally have an attorney.
Taylor was here last. time.
Oh, she's here. Okay.
He was. Didn't get them. So you all know that when he promotes to panelists, you actually get completely cut off
Right.
for like 10 or 20 seconds and then come back in. Having been on the other side.
Okay, so good evening. My name is Rich Williams. I'm with Insight Engineering. And Jaime did a good job explaining, but what I'd like to do is, Jim, did you want to say a few things?
Yeah, I apologize. I'm working off my iPhone because I'm having computer problems, but thank you, Rich. Yeah, we're joined by Taylor Palmer from Cuddy and Feder, Rich Williams from Insight Engineering, Chris Hahn from WBP Development, and Maxwell Powell from Buyer Blinder Bill. As Jaime did a good job introducing us, we've made a few minor updates to the plans since we were last before you, which Rich will walk you through. They have a very minor effect on the variances sought. And primarily, well, the main changes were eliminating the basement parking except for 3 or 4 handicap spaces, which Rich will show. We've been able to eliminate the basement parking primarily because we think it'll help, well, we know it'll help our conversations with the DEC and Con Ed as we continue to work with Con Ed on the remediation of the site. So when we first started, we thought we needed the basement for floodplain mitigation, but over the past year and a half, as we've been studying the plans and working through this process with your various boards, it's been demonstrated that it's not necessary. So that has allowed us to pivot with Con Ed, and it's led to what we think is a better plan. Doesn't affect, again, in any material way the variance is sought. And with that, Rich, I think it'd be best for you to walk through the plans and we could answer any questions.
Okay, sure. So the first image I brought up for you tonight is our current site plan with the previous site plan we presented to you overlaid in red. So focusing specifically on the parking garage at first, as Jaime mentioned, we did our test with the fire department. We studied a couple of different accesses to the site, one of which was the potential for the fire department to back straight into the site, turn the western leg of the bridge on the angle so that they could back on the bridge, set the rear of the truck here. And that is what you see in this change right here to the bridge, based on how we laid out cones in the field. We were able to actually really in real life maneuver the truck, measure up the bridge, and show it based on our discussions with the fire department. The second change that Jim mentioned was the restructuring or the reshaping of the parking garage slightly. You can see in the southeast corner, we squared the building off. Again, the red line is the previous line we presented to you. We also slid the building to the west slightly, which allowed us to move the 4th level access road to the west. We also straightened out the entrance to create some better maneuverability onto Water Street. That was necessitated by the fact that as a result of trying to increase parking on the garage, we relocated the elevator space and the stairwell space to this little block here off the corner. One of the other things you noticed is as we were contemplating the variances that were sought, we were previously seeking a variance to be within 1 foot of the property line on this corner. Final building designs haven't been obtained yet, and the final structural design hasn't been done. So we were concerned with some of our assumptions for wall thickness and how the paneling might join to the wall at the end of the day. So we are now seeking a 0 foot variance, or basically to build to the property line at this corner. Ultimately, we don't think we're going to be that close, but because we don't have the final thicknesses of the paneling yet designed and how they'll attach to the building to result in total building thickness, we want to give ourselves a little bit of buffer so we don't shortchange the variance being sought. The other thing Jim mentioned was the handicap parking. As a result of eliminating the parking in the basement, we did have handicap parking located in the basement itself. In an effort to keep some handicap spaces in the mixed use building, we are proposing 3 spaces. There were previously 4 in this building off the southwest corner of the building. It'll be located in a notch or a nook created on the ground floor level of the building. And there'll then be an internal access to access the various amenity spaces, lobby spaces inside the building. What the overall impact is on the variances that we discussed at the last meeting, we believe to be minimal. This was the table that we submitted last time, although I added a new column. This column here was the variances as we discussed them. This column here, or these 2 columns here, show the current variances as were sought so that we can quickly compare the changes between our last conversation and what we're currently proposing. The first variance that changed is the parking structure is proposed within 20 feet of the street. We were previously seeking a variance of 11.5 feet. And again, as a result of us accommodating for that 1 foot shift, we're now seeking 12.5 feet. The other was the parking structure being within 15 feet of the lot line. Again, we had that 1 foot separation to the property line for reasons I just discussed. We're now seeking that to be 0 foot to give us a little flexibility in design of the building and the paneling system. The next variance was the minimum setback for the parking and loading areas from the street or lot line to the parking structure. Again, we had that same 1 foot variance we just discussed, which is now 0. Impervious coverage was the one variance we didn't discuss in detail last time. Just to go back to the site plan, or just to show you the numbers first, 60% is required. We were previously providing 65.6 or a 5.6% variance. I had mentioned at the last meeting, as a result of the fire department, that number may go up slightly as we reconfigure the bridge. It did, it went up 0.3% to 65.9. And the one thing that we did discuss at the last meeting that I just want to remind the board is that coverage is not based on the entire 3.2 acres of lot area. It is only based on the 2.1 acres or subdivided lot on which mixed-use building and parking garage will exist. Because again, the rear portion or the rear 1.1 acres is going to be retained by the village. So as a result of the lower total lot area, our coverage goes up, necessitating a variance. But these are now the final numbers. Again, we talked about that 1 foot variance that also affects having parking in the front yard. Proposing to install a driveway entrance within 50 feet of the intersection. We were previously seeking 9.5 feet. We're going to seek now 10.5 feet. That's not as a result of us moving this entrance closer to the intersection. Here's where it was previously shown. Here's where it's currently shown. We just got a little more specific in how we measured and wanted to make sure we were measuring this conservatively. So we added the dimension to the plan. And the reason why we wanted to do that is because it is a gray area as to how you measure the intersection. So in the interest of not making a mistake and coming back before your board, we wanted to make sure we took the most conservative measurements possible. And then the other thing is the maximum of 30% of the parking along the street frontage of Central Avenue. Again, this has to do with our on-site parking along the street frontage. That goes from what we previously sought as a 45% variance down to a 43% variance. That did decrease slightly. Again, we feel all those changes to be slightly minor, but we wanted to present them to you, give the board an opportunity to react to them, see what comments you had. And we're hopeful that at the next meeting, we can advertise and hopefully come back for favorable determination.
And this is Jim again. I'll just add that our parking count has not changed based on this current plan.
Yeah, I had one. You had mentioned a 0 foot clearance with regard to the parking structure, which could be within 15 feet of the lot line. So you say you're to go, the building's gonna go right to the curb line, or is it gonna be a sidewalk there, or what's going on? The sidewalk.
Actually, Rich, do you want to show that again, maybe?
So we were previously seeking, it's right on this front corner here. And this red line was the previous edge of our building, and that had contemplated, I believe, a 12-inch thick wall. So we had a 62-foot overall garage width. We wanted to leave ourselves a little bit of flexibility to go closer to the lot line with, for instance, paneling. So if the structural engineer comes back and says, hey, I need a wall thickness of 15 inches, and then we attach paneling to the front of that building, that would put us within the 1 foot variance that we were previously asking for. So our intent is not to build to the lot line, but we didn't want to also leave ourselves shortchanged knowing that a final structural design has to be accomplished.
It's worth noting that at the end of this project, they're gonna have to do an as-built survey determining where they are in accordance with all of this, and it being such a strange lot, it's not like they can sort of push it closer to the stream and not affect some other journey. So it's a better decision to do something where there's a little bit of flexibility.
Are there any other questions on the board? If there are no other questions from the board, this matter will be adjourned to our next meeting.
I don't think they actually need to renotice. They noticed for this meeting as it were, but they wouldn't have to renotice because none of the notices that they did reflected, there's no new variances. They're only different size variances, but the size of the variance is not listed in the notice, just the type of variance. And we'll further look internally, but I don't believe that they need to be noticed.
Will we get the fire department determination in writing?
So I guess this is a good question, Rich, and we need those drawings back from you printed so that I can send it to the fire department. The
Okay.
answer is probably no. We won't get it in writing, but we will certainly follow.
All right, gentlemen, we will see you again next month.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. A motion to adjourn,
So,
Seconded, Olga.
if there's no objection to adjourn the motion at this time. Okay. Carry. We are up to DBA 05-2022 16 Campbell.
Okay, so the applicant is here to seek a few different variances. So last time they were here, we spoke a little bit about the use variance in regards to the construction yard. And since then, we determined they also need use variance for the 5-unit apartment house that they had on the property as well. They resubmitted materials on that. They also had phase 2 completed an environmental report to determine if there's any sort of impact from the construction yard being there. Warren testing done, determined there's no significant vapors there, no significant chemical smells. I visited the site myself and did not see anything that looked to be missed. Report done by engineers, so there's an official body for that. We were also able to find some more information in the files. So we determined that there was an actual application in, I want to say
59.
59. Is that one? In 61, actually. Yeah, so that application was in 1961. It was turned down for a variance for a 5-family at that time.
Right, they said it was a,
Yeah.
it was a, 2-family at the time.
It was a 2-family, they requested a 5 and it.
But that had nothing to do with the use of the property for construction.
No, it
It
didn't actually.
actually said that the use of the property at that time was a 2-family
Family.
residence. So the construction yard was not there at that time.
But in 69,
Yeah, so the following down this road, so there's a couple of COs you can see, that's for the expansion of family room and an expansion of or an alteration that enclosed the interior porch. Both of those would require variances at the time for the expansion of non-conforming use. They did not receive any variances at that time for those non-conforming uses. Again, in following along this list, there was the whole CBA variance details you can kind of see was denied. Then there was
And 69 was, they found there were 2 garages built with no permit.
yeah, so 69 two roads and permits.
And it was referenced in that letter also that they wanted to inspect the house because it's, only 2 families were left.
Yeah. So
And stated that no storage of business equipment is allowed.
Yeah, so there's a lot of other, violations over the years, about the extension of the garages, about the use of, renting of the space out for garages. The applicants themselves actually, mentioned that in 1974, they were renting the property out for their business before they purchased the property in 1978 to run a business, which at that time was also not allowed, and was not approved. So they're correct that it's been used in that way for 50 years, but it is not,
But it's
not
never
legal,
utilized.
it's not conforming,
Right.
and we get
It was
violations.
never legal, so it's not like some other things where you have a legal non-conforming use, it was never legal.
No,
Yeah,
and this is a commercial use that they're doing. Have they been paying commercial taxes this whole time or residential tax?
so the tax assessor has it listed in the 411. The 411 is an apartment house multifamily, so it's not being taxed that way. As far as we can tell, it's not being taxed as a.
Bill,
Because it's really two uses, I mean, that's
Yes.
something we haven't looked at also in terms of variance. It's two completely different uses on one property
you've got a residential building,
and a commercial. use.
and then you've got a commercial lot, so the majority of the lot is commercial use. And my question, I believe, please let me know if I'm wrong, commercial taxes are higher than residential taxes, yes?
Yeah, so that gets to a couple of other points. So one of the points that they made in terms of their inability to make a profit without renting it and using it the way that they are is that because they are currently renting it out to, 4 people, they're just making a little bit of money. If they were to rent it out for less, they would make more, but they're not charging themselves rent for the largest apartment there, which is the one that the mother lives in. They're not charging rent for the cost of the construction yard, which certainly they out of rent.
Commercial use is not paying rent.
And if they were using all those things and making money for that, then their financial situation would not look quite the way that they're expressing that it does.
I understand that, but at the same time, the village has not received the income that they should have received in tax revenue for the commercial property for all these many years. That's a lot of money that we could be using for body armor for police, for turnout gear for firemen, for more concerts in the park. Substantial money. And we're not asking for that back, are we?
I think one of the issues that we have to look at, because it was never approved and it was, it was like they're kind of asking now and they have asked in the past, but it was never approved for the construction yard or the 5 bedrooms,
Five
the
families.
5 families in that house. I don't know if we could have taxed them.
Because we never approved it.
Oh, they actually, the assessor could tax what they see. You know, there's a lot of instances where they'll tell you,
Yeah.
right, they can tax you, which they do have a property class that they could place the taxing for for commercial and residential combined. But this is right now being taxed as a 411, which is for family and up. And often they've taxed on what they could see. I mean, Tyler Assessment went out in 2016 and were able to change tax, but they'll tell the public, what you're being taxed is not necessarily what's considered legal. We're just taxing for what we're aware of.
Yeah, and so my understanding of the property tax are, they do know about those garages. They are being assessed as improvements. And so I'm not sure about the tax rate differential between residential vacant land and commercial vacant land. But the tax rate essentially is the value of the land plus the value of the improvements.
Right.
They do know that there are 5 apartments. They do know that there's buildings there. They do know that there's garages there.
Great.
So from that end, I don't know how much in tax they should be paying versus what they are paying. But the assessor, Mark, does know about it, at least for the past.
Thank you.
I would assume though that if they meet all these improvements, they will land into a better shape in terms of the way it's organized, the way it's used, things of that sort. That's considered an improvement, and thus the tax assessor would be visiting them at some point. And
If you legalize anything
Yeah.
here and
Right.
yes, it will get change.
I want to distinguish the term improvement to like make it better and the term improvement for tax purposes, which is to build something. So for tax purposes, an improvement is anything you build. It could be a hideous shed. It's considered an improvement to the land, even though I think it doesn't correspond with making something better. That's not what that means.
No, that's my point.
Okay,
Very cool.
So I guess my question goes back to the 1969 letter dated October 28th. It clearly states that, that there was an inspection done on the property and found the construction of 2 more garages in the rear of the property. And in checking the files, we find that no building permit has been issued for this construction. We would also like to make an appointment with you to go through the house to inspect the number of occupants in the dwelling. This is a 2-family zone and only 2 families are allowed in this building. So, somewhere along the line after 1969,
They just did it.
they just did it. And I think that that needs to be made clear.
so
So
what,
you need to be looking at this, you know, so let's say it was a 2-family house. And they were coming to you and saying, we'd like to make it a 5-family and we'd like to have this commercial use that needs to be defined in the rear of it. Now, part of what you're gonna look at when you look at the impact on the neighborhood, you could take into consideration the fact that, well, it's already there, so it's gonna impact. But you're really looking at it as if they were coming to you and asking for permission
For everything. I mean, just to be clear, so you're.
beyond the 2 units.
Yeah, on the 2 units.
So the
and
2 units is
construction.
legal non-conforming because at some point, I think in the early 70s, it was rezoned to a single family zone. But we know there were 2 units already. So the 2-family is legally non-conforming.
yeah, so and there's a few notes that I made in a staff report. And you want to keep this in mind, you were examining a use variance for the 5-family use, which is one different. So examining a use variance, which is for the construction mode, which is potentially something else. But it's not really clear what they're trying to do to get a variance for, because the way that they're using it is not discreetly the use, right? There's no office where they're running their business out of there and they just have a yard that's an accessory to that. So essentially, the yard is an accessory to a business that exists somewhere else. That some work is done here and some work is done elsewhere.
But the yard is,
Oh.
it's a construction yard and they do have an office there.
If you store stuff there, it's like a
So-
parking lot that has.
It's not clear because there is this business, Joe, correct me if I'm wrong here, this business exists in another municipality as well. The primary office is in that other municipality, correct?
Well, I mean, the owner's information that we have in our records show that their primary residence is in Yorktown on Huntington.
Where they live,
Yeah.
yeah.
Maybe
But I don't know where the business is located, but I don't know where the business is registered. The only thing I would say is when they gave us layout plans of the house, I don't see, where did they indicate that the office? They
Yes,
said
that's
verbally
what-
at the meeting there's an office, but where is
But
it
let
located?
me clarify it. Actually, if you go back and look at the phase 1 they did, one of the garages also does have an office space in it. You said it might have been upstairs. So there is an office space. They
But-
have mentioned that the mother's apartment, she does some work for the business in her office. I don't, or in her apartment. I don't know that that's a formal office so much.
Well,
She is
the only
part
thing,
owner of the business. And she, writes out some, does some.
I mean, the only thing I can say to that is, I mean, our code says that if you run a home-based business, it has to be in the main residence. So if the office of the business is not necessarily, is in an accessory structure,
I think the big issue isn't the use of the mother's apartment, who is an owner of the business. For sort of an office use that they do some office work in there. I don't think that's the main issue here. There's much bigger issues.
But I'm gonna also point out in their drawings, the top floor apartment, there's a bedroom, and I still can't
You can't
figure out
get
how
to
you
it.
access. it.
Yeah, there's some mistakes in those drawings, and I know the applicant has this Your attorney has his hand raised. We'll get to you in a minute. Yeah, the drawings have some issues.
That's a prison. That's a-
They showed some walls where there can't be a wall or you couldn't get to a bedroom.
Well, there's also, I believe, one apartment that just shows, if I'm correct, one apartment is a bathroom, a
Oh,
kitchen, and all
they're-
bedrooms,
There's
correct?
no living areas. there.
Yeah.
Right, it's all.
So I don't know about with that apartment, if that's
But those are,
accurate.
so, assuming you gave them a use variance for 5 units, there's still more steps to be followed. So they would have to then apply for a building permit for the configuration of those 5 units. And Joe would have to go in and make sure that everything in that building meets building code requirements. So, and there may be a number of things that need to be changed. There's hallway lighting and exit lighting requirements. There's egress requirements. There's all of those building code things. So, you know, once you, if you give the use variance to allow 5 units, and we also haven't looked at is it habitable in this zone? We haven't looked at the habitable.
No.
No, it's all livable space.
Okay, so we haven't looked at that issue yet with these units either. So again, the use variance would be just a first step. It doesn't make those apartments legal.
Got it.
So,
It makes the use legal.
so technically, apartments 2 and 3, which one is 771 square feet, the other one is 44 square feet, do not fit the livable.
No, they're not meeting the minimum livable space.
The 2 middle apartments aren't even, and the top apartment doesn't even have has no living area, it has bedrooms, but no living.
Right. So again, remember, and we talked about this with the construction yard also. If the use variances are granted, there may still be some area variances and other variances. Remember, there's no setbacks for some of those garages, so there may be other variances, and they would also still have to go to the planning board.
Right.
So, all we're talking about really is the use.
So question. Could we grant them a variance to use it as a 4-family house? And then require them to take the space and reconfigure it so that all of the apartments in it have the 4 apartments have the right number of square feet?
Well, they're gonna have the right number of square feet at the end of the day, no matter what. So you can say, we're not gonna grant the use variance for 5. But we are willing to grant one for 4. Now we have to go through
Got it.
a lot of steps before we get there.
I know we're waiting for them to speak, but having been through several of these with them over the past year and a half, however long it's been. And we had to look at the financial statements, and we had to go over that because to meet one of the 4 criteria of use variances. The thing I've always had trouble reconciling, and I guess there's still more to find out, is this is a pretty significant use variance. And I know it was until recently they finally found all the documentation on the planning side. I'm having trouble, no matter how I feel, justifying such a big use and eventually area variance. Because if anybody else came to this board with such significant things from, 2-family home to go to a 5-family home, adding construction, there's no way that we would approve that. I mean, I can't preemptively make that judgment, but I haven't seen anything.
5-family home and a active construction yard
Yes.
on a property in a single family district
And without having
is a lot.
Yes,
So
without having clarity on the things that, I know we're not voting today, there's other stuff, going on, but just so they're hearing the concerns that I would bring up in the future anyway, in advance. I don't feel comfortable voting on anything in the future without knowing, which is why I'm giving this information now.
Mhm.
Definitively how the tax situation works out. Definitively how that would be classified if it's 411 now. I know, like, what is this thing and what's the plan? I know we're one part of the process, but I don't feel comfortable making a decision if something's gonna change down the road, because then we make precipitating decisions we're like, oh, well, we already passed this, so.
Yeah.
Well, it would become in actuality a mixed use property.
It would be a-
Yeah.
Because you'd have the commercial use and the residential use.
in a single family. zone.
Right, in a single family zone, so that may actually be another piece of the variance, because you have two uses, you're really allowing a mixed use.
So
Yeah, I mean, me and Joe were looking at it, it looks like it falls more under the criteria, what's it called, 485, which is like multi-structure, multi-use. The zoning code, the property tax code allow for.
And that's
stuff like
really
that.
up to the assessor.
Yeah, okay, but we could ask, what the tax implications are. I'm not sure,
So one of the things that Kyle had brought up was financials, and I don't remember seeing like a real set of financials.
We did ask for them.
And we've asked for them, I know. a few
Multiple
times.
times.
We've actually, I remember.
What we
back
have is
in-
projection of the rental revenue.
Yeah, that's not
That's
what we
not
have.
financial.
yeah,
Well, I think it was like overall too, because, you know, if the business can't afford a separate commercial location. I think it was part of, you know, why they're asking for this variance so that they can use this property that
So-
way.
Somebody,
But this isn't about the business
Yeah.
and the viability of the business, it's about the property.
Okay,
So for a use variance, they have to show that the property cannot yield a reasonable return for any permitted use. That's a little tricky, because the permitted use here, well, the permitted use here is a one family, or actually in this case, it's a two family. That's the, or they'd have to go through the other permitted uses.
Right.
In that zone and show that none of those can yield a reasonable return.
yeah,
But
so.
I think
the-
that's what we've been asking,
Okay.
but we haven't seen that.
We'd like to see that.
We'd
we
like
had,
to
we
see-
had early on in, I think like January or February, also asked for other things like, the safety of tenants, of fence, and there was a whole list of things that we had given
So
them.
they did provide
Okay.
a separation of the parking and the fence to address that issue.
They have a site plan, they've
Okay.
given a site plan of their, what would be the proposed site plan. Theoretically, although that site plan would need approval from the.
I feel like there's always like a lack of
planning
clarity.
board. But here's the, there's an important component to all this. You can also, implement conditions on, what they can do. So I wanna show you the plan here and give you some for instances of how you do it. So, this area, we looked back in the records and as of about 2010, 2013 was a garden. It's being used to plant plants. Since then, they have proposed using it as material storage, saying that that's how it's being used now. There's nothing that would stop you from saying, no, look, this whole area back here cannot be used in that way at all. We don't want material storage. We'll allow you to park some of your vehicles, but not all of your vehicles. You'll be limited to a certain number of vehicles. There is precedent, obviously, with another application that we're dealing with right now in the planning board, where the zoning board granted them the ability to park 3 vehicles. So you could certainly say, look, we understand these garages are here. There's nothing we can do about the garages. You can use the garages. You can park a certain number of vehicles, no larger than, a certain number of tires, right? So you can say no more than 6 wheels or whatever makes sense. And you can say that's the limitations. You can't only use this portion of the yard. You have to provide screen around the whole property, to make sure that your neighbors who can currently look into the yard can no longer use it that way. And you can also say that the 5 family may or may not work. I would note that it is an S75 district. An S75 district requires 7,500 square feet for a single property, for a single unit. The property itself is almost 48,000 square feet. So it's large enough to fit 5 single family homes. Technically, but the irregular shape means it would never conform with all of the, the kinds of properties that you need. So it's not as if that's improbable. And it's also not really out of the ordinary for the village as a whole to have people who run a construction business park their vehicles in their backyard. So it's not as if to say that someone running their business sort of out of their house, at least on a limited level, is completely compatible. In fact, this property abuts another property that's using it in the same way. But it doesn't mean that they should get the full extent of what they have now And certainly there are real incompatibilities that I noticed when I was there in my visit lesson, where there are people living up there. There could be kids walking around, and those kids can walk right into a shed and get into chemicals or get into, tools that hurt them, get injure them. And those are incompatible, right? Children playing in the backyard is fully incompatible with chainsaw or, piles of wood. The trash that's been piled up brings, mice, rats. These are things that are incompatible with residential districts. And so there's a way that you can sort of say yes to some of these things, no to other parts of it. Limit the zone where they're allowed to live.
But so that we could say that we can limit the size to a four-family house. And we can say that they have to put some kind of separation, like a fence or whatnot, between the residential use and the commercial use in order to provide for the safety of the residents. And then.
Is that,
And they have
I
to
mean-
vote, right? They have.
I mean, is that, the question, is that something that's handled during site plan? And their focus is the use or,
No, so yeah, a lot of this does need to be handled through site plan, but you can make a
You
decision.
can have conditions on your use variance.
So,
Okay.
So, it's so big. I mean, there's tanks in the garages, there's piles and piles of trash. And so I feel like it may make more sense to say, let's separate the two things. Let's separate the residential from the commercial and then, and require them to physically separate the residential from the commercial. Having done that, you say, okay, this is your residential, this is how many parking spaces, this is how many units, this is the rules you have to,
Yeah.
So is that,
compliance.
I'm
Can we
gonna-
do that?
piggyback
Yeah.
to Bob, asking that they actually give us a clear understanding of what use is. And they need to delineate to the board that, they need to get a use variance for the house. It's zoned as two-family, we now have five-family, and we need a variance for the additional, what's out. Because right now it's all muddled. It's like, everything is muddled together, and I think it's not clear. And, for the board to have to separate it, I don't think that's a good idea. I think.
Yeah,
it's-
but I
it's
think,
Clear.
That's right.
when we talked about conditions on the use variance, like if you were gonna grant use variance for the construction yard, yes, there's a lot of things that would be dealt with in the planning board site plan approval, but there's things that you may want as a condition that you're not willing to grant the use variance unless they've provided a clear separation between the uses for purposes of safety,
Okay.
that kind of thing.
There's a lot of things like that. I remember when the presentation was made for the additional buildings in the back, and as someone who also owns a business, I am not empathetic to, well, we have this whole property, let's maximize it with as many buildings as possible. That's not a reason to me. So in the buildings in the rear, which was presented the last time, all the way in the back to the right side.
Right, and by the way, that plan does show the fence that they put to separate the house.
And I remember that. I remember when these were added. There would be, for me personally, there would need to be an extremely compelling reason why additional space on the property needs to have more buildings on it, regardless of how it's currently being used. Because there were a lot of things done in the past that weren't supposed to be. So to get those approved and then add additional buildings that will need variances, it doesn't. I don't understand a reason why.
I
Yeah, and I'm
also,
not sure those were buildings, but that's what they're proposing to do in those areas.
Yeah, the new color.
I also-
storage shed too.
I also want to keep in mind and consider the concerns of the neighbors who did appear at one of our, open hearings, that they were concerned about, why all of a sudden are you cleaning this up? What are your intentions for this use, for the future? And I want to make sure that we keep that in mind, the concerns of the people that are right there at the line of
Yeah.
that back
And I thought there were some statements made when the neighbors raised this issue that they would not be doing anything additional in the rear of the property.
That they were just cleaning up.
And they were
Right,
just
and now that
cleaning
plan
up. Now the plan
shows,
shows.
If they're
yeah,
trying to be
for that
neighborly
area.
and just cleaning up.
But this area, that is the area that they're talking about proposing all this storage. As you can see, from this direction, there's nothing, from the other direction, there's a whole lot of, mixed in with materials.
So then, you know, the question was, a year ago, it was all cleaned up, but now it's not.
My understanding, I got a call today from the, attorney, and he said that they went and cleaned it up, it's all been cleaned up. They
So,
wanted me to go out today at like 3 o'clock, last night, I couldn't do it, unfortunately, but they were certain that they did clean it up again.
cleaning up doesn't matter to me because it's temporary. My concern is, okay, great, you cleaned it up, you're approved, what happens next? And that is what the neighbors were talking about.
Yes.
I understand their concerns. There's decades of historical precedent for just doing stuff, whether or not it was them or their father.
The neighbors wanted assurance that there was not gonna be expansion into that rear part of the property.
Correct.
It was my recollection.
Yeah, and so the way that they designed it, and the way it is today, and I think the way that their drawing shows it, there's no screening. So you can see here, and you can't tell, but over here, you can see the neighbors, you can see directly into the yard. You know, there's nothing preventing them from looking at the backyard. And, you know, I think that's obviously problematic for a lot of reasons. But certainly when your conditions can't be that they have to provide for hedge screening. A lot of the equipment that they've shown to be stored, even in the area that you might reasonably say you could put stuff. I just want to get back to the,
But there was a street
Schematic.
back there at one point.
there was, yeah, so there was a tree that they took down recently.
It was part of their cleanup, as I remember.
Maybe, so you can see this,
It was one
no,
of the things that made the
we're
neighbors
prepping
back
space for
nervous,
building.
like,
Yeah.
why are you taking
Taken
down?
down, cleaned down.
so you can see here, there's the metal container and equipment storage, and again, you know,
Those are gonna be added, correct?
yeah, they're very, well, because they're already
Different-
using it that way.
Well, the different colors.
Yeah, they're already.
Well, I don't
the
think
different
those are
colors
actually buildings. I think those are areas where they're
Yeah,
proposing to
got
do that.
They are storing stuff in all of these locations and this location. When I was there, there was very few square feet of where there wasn't stuff. So nonetheless, you can't move a building unless you tell them to tear it down. However, you can say that you need to provide screening where there is no building. Instead of putting the equipment all the way up to the edge of the property. Right.
So that-
And on the
that
rear,
stuff is
the rear, I
Yeah.
think was the biggest concern.
Yes.
And
This is.
I'd like to do just, you know, they're running a business. And right now, they're storing a
That's
bunch of
right.
equipment and a bunch of trash, a bunch of materials. And they cleaned it up. Well, that's great. But they need to show us what plan they have for putting that stuff somewhere, because they're running a business, gonna keep making more trash. You're gonna keep having more materials. If they can't put it there, where are they gonna put it? Because otherwise, they're just gonna come back and put it there again.
Well, I think that, so that's a big part of what's so important about figuring this out and trying to make sense of it. We can't be responsible, the planning and department can't be responsible for going out and checking them every couple of weeks to make sure they're compliant with the site plan. You have to provide some conditions that assume that it's a contractor's yard, it's gonna be dirty, it's gonna be messy. And so they're gonna use it in the way that they were using it last week, they're not gonna keep cleaning it up every single week. So providing that screening allows for them to do what they have to do to run a business, and providing them, if nothing else, with a certain square footage, then, okay, you're currently using, 30,000 square feet to run this, you need to contract that to, half that, or 20,000 square feet, and no more than that, and then that's your footprint determined in site plan, but you have to provide screening around the edges.
So
of
my
the property.
And maybe it's taking that fence in the back and see where it says gate, no gate there.
No gate.
Right.
Not using, but that's just one
That's a thing, yeah.
type of thing.
So, and the reason, I mean, we don't have a lot of reasons why we're continuing to ask questions or have concerns, but, we are already dealing with a historical issue that's been an issue. So in a situation where we've set conditions, we've approved everything, great, now something else happens. Does whoever's on the board at that time then have the weight of all these decisions prior? Be like, no, you can't. And you can't because conditions were set and you violated them, because we're already dealing with violations, so how?
So you can, so, speaking of the future, you can if somebody got a use variance today, and they came back in 4 years, circumstances changed, and they wanted to get another use variance, they could. But here's the thing, so if they have this property, they grant a use variance, which you very well might grant some use variance, right? And then it wouldn't be necessarily that. They could sell the property tomorrow, and the person who's saying they're gonna do all these things and run it the right way today may not be so good when the new person comes in. Once that use is available to the owner, it's available to any owner.
This was the property.
To me, the protection of the neighbors is number one priority here.
Mhm.
So I think that maybe we should be looking at the area variances first,
Well,
assuming that the change of use is not gonna, it's the same as it is right now.
I mean, unless I'm mistaken, I think the use variance is more important because they have to meet all 4 of these exactly, but they can't not meet one of these.
Right.
Versus with an area variance, there's some,
Yeah, the criteria is much stronger.
yeah.
For the use.
And I don't, like, I would discourage you from, if you think that this site plan, under which this use variance is unacceptable, but there is one that is acceptable, then tell the applicant what you think would be acceptable and have them come back and present that.
What is the most efficient way to discuss this? I mean, what if we have different opinions? Like, how do we, is that all done in the room now because it's a public meeting?
Yeah, you have to have those discussions.
So can I throw some things?
You, well, you know, what order do you guys want to do this in at this point? Do you want to let them? Or do you want to,
There's
and
things,
then have your discussion, or do you want to?
I think there's certain things we've already been presented multiple times, and
Yes.
I don't think there is a compelling need for some of the things I wanted to throw it for. But I'm just curious what everybody else thought. So one specific thing is, they already put the fence in. Great, how high is it? Got it. My concern is the backyard. I don't feel comfortable adding additional buildings at all.
I don't think they're
They're
adding
not-
buildings, they're adding areas where they're gonna store things. Those
I-
aren't
Requires
buildings.
Material storage.
I don't feel comfortable
Yeah,
So,
doing anything in the back.
Yeah.
Period.
yeah, me neither.
so if one of the things that we would like to say is from, I don't know, whatever
Whatever
that point what area is to the property line, that, you know, it should remain as open space.
A buffer,
Right.
A buffer.
a buffer.
It could be like from the fence.
Because
back.
one of
From the
things-
fence
From the
back.
current
From
fence
the
to the
fence,
property
from the
line.
You have to be.
That's not a current,
There is no current.
that's a proposed.
Oh,
Right, so from the proposed,
from the proposed fence line to the property line, we do not want anything to be there. We want it to remain like it is.
well, to remain,
No, you might want some plants.
Yeah.
yeah, you want the plantings back there.
Yes.
And some
Open
screening.
Space.
Greenery.
So the screening is the thing, because there's a difference between a 3-foot fence, right, 7-foot fence.
Well, screening for the neighbors so that they're not looking at.
And there's some elevation changes in that neighborhood. I would think that you're gonna want tall trees,
Okay.
tall hedges. Up in that will block it out, and so they can do it a couple ways. They can either block it going this way, right? Or they can block it going around here. But, having something here that can't be easily moved is probably a better idea. If you're planting a row of trees here, it's sort of prevented and
And
from
no
physically
gates.
moving into that space,
No gates.
that might be a gift.
Right, so how do we word that? And we want it to be open space with screening.
We
from
can
the-
take care of that one.
You can do that?
Can I ask a question, just as an enforcement for the building department? If we have what are we using as a criteria for the use of this type of a commercial business back in a residential district? I mean, we have a number of properties where landscapers and so forth try to use their properties to store their trucks and so forth on it. Are we, we give violations to people for running, commercial trucks and stuff in a residential district. Are they gonna be able to, what's gonna be the criteria why this would be different than, say, any other person who wants to use their property for their commercial construction business?
And that's where we're gonna have to go through the use variance criteria
Right.
and determine if they meet it. And they may not be able to meet it.
They may not, right, they may or may not.
And one of the criteria is that it's unique.
One
I-
of the things that I haven't really heard, thrown into the discussion is noise. And how it affect, how their construction noise affects their neighbors. Whether it's been done for a long time that way, permitted or non-permitted. I can't imagine that there isn't a noise issue.
So the applicant has asserted that they don't make any noise. The stuff that I saw, I'm just gonna say from my perspective, we've not gotten any noise complaints from the neighbors.
Okay.
They've asserted they do not make noise, and just based off of what seems to be going on there, they're sort of bringing trucks in, they might be doing some mechanic work. They bring in, piles of bricks, drop them, make a little noise, but it's not a active site, so.
People are
But my
yelling at each
understanding is
other.
they're a construction business, so the bulk of their work is offsite.
Offsite,
Correct.
right.
This is where they're storing equipment and materials.
So, I'm glad Joe brought his point up. It's what we've been talking about, but coming from his perspective, because a few months ago, when I voted or wanted to vote, I forget which way I went, in the negative for the 2 parking spots in the grass up front, but it was already approved in the past. I got it. I understood why I was bound by the prior decision. That is exactly the reason, and that's a small one. That's exactly the reason why I'm worried about setting precedent, because one of their arguments in the original approval that I went back and read was, oh, well, other people on the street are doing it, and I just, there's too many things that I just,
So other people on the street is a bad argument, because one of the criteria on a use variance is that the alleged hardship relating to the property in question is unique.
which is why when I was not happy and I wanted to go back and understand what was going on, that was one of the reasons that was accepted by the board at that time.
Right.
So while I'm hemmed in by the decision and disagreed with it, but I wasn't on the board at the time, with something this major, that's a huge precedent in that district or districts like it, and that's what I'm struggling with.
Yes.
I mean, it should, so just as you just said, it shouldn't set a precedent, because the
It's
unique aspect of this, is why it would need to be granted.
Got
If it applied to everybody, if everybody should be getting this, because they all needed it.
They
then
wouldn't get
need
it.
a rezoning, it would require a rezoning, not a. Not a
And they've
variance.
gone for rezoning and they were denied.
Right.
Well,
They did go for.
so
rezoning of-
they went through the process of trying to see if they could get it. So they, a couple of years ago, they did pursue going to the neighbor to see if they could get an expansion of the institute zone over to this district that would have been a little bit more conforming than it is here. So there is one parcel between them and the institute zone. The neighbor was not interested in doing that, and we were not interested in entertaining a rezoning over the objections of the neighbor. No. No, well, not
Not
necessarily.
necessarily.
We don't know
Because
that it would
it's
have
all
gotten.
permitted in that zone.
So could we ask the property owners to present what their plan would be with, from the proposed fence line, the end of the property line, that back area? Have them make a presentation, knowing that we want that area to be open space and we want it to be shielded, for the neighbors.
Screening.
Can we ask them to provide that next time? Because that's a concrete thing we can solve.
Yeah. So we do, the applicant is here, and I think
They've heard the conversation.
they've heard the conversation, and they may have been expecting some of this, so.
So I think one of the other questions that, and I'd like them to really give the zoning board clear and concise, that the construction yard is from this point to this part.
And this is what the youth.
And this is what the use is going, the house has 5 apartments and this is the split, and what is the area variances needed within, because we know that some of them are small, necessary, I think it all needs to be laid out, because right now, we're making those determinations and that's not our determination, that's they need to bring that to us, so.
and while there's some emotion in here, like literally, there's the 4 criteria that have to be met, and if any or more of the above factors are not proven by the applicant, state law requires us to deny it. So this isn't just us being like, oh, we don't like these people, or we don't like this property. It's bigger than that, and it is law. So, that's why we're being so hard about it.
But if we had to vote on this today and went through the criteria, we would find they don't meet it and we would have to vote no. So we're not trying to not give these people what they want. Clearly, we're working really hard not to vote no. So we need the applicants to help
Or to at
us.
least give them the chance
Chance
to
to
show.
show
yeah.
that they have to.
You know, help us get to where we can vote on this.
Right now, we can't.
Right now, we can't.
May we address the board?
Yes.
Good evening. Good evening, Madam Chair, members of the board. David Steinmetz from the law firm of Zarin and Steinmetz. I'm here tonight representing John and Lauren Apollonio. I'm joined by Jim Anacarico. And boy, you've covered a lot of ground. Little difficult. I've taken a lot of notes, and I hope that we can try to have a sequential discussion. It's great listening to all of you deliberate, and genuinely appreciate the time, the energy, the intellect that you've put in. Linda knows me quite well. Very difficult to not be able to respond as you guys go through 25 minutes of discussion and deliberation. So first and foremost, thank you. I also really want to thank Jaime and Linda for taking the time most recently to discuss this application with me. And I thank Joe as well for furnishing information. Madam Chair, all my colleagues have appeared in front of you. I have not. This is my first time on this application in front of you, so I'm glad I'm here. I've been doing, as some of you may know, I've been doing land use in this county for over 30 years. This is a very unique and very challenging application. As a result of which, and after listening to you for over 20 minutes cover a host of issues, I'm taking 3 giant steps back. This matter first started when I was contacted in 2015, 7 years ago, in connection with a violation. And Jaime talked about it briefly, but I want to kind of drill down on it. I spent the better part of 5.5 years, 3 different village planners, 3 different village attorneys, discussing how to address this. And I think it's important to kind of shape some of your thinking. And you've all raised a lot of really good questions about uniqueness, satisfying the factors, the Herculean standard that I know my clients have to achieve to get a use variance. I want you all to understand, I did not want to pursue a use variance. I wanted to achieve a rezoning to the NC2 zoning district for a very simple zoning, land use, planning, and environmental reason. And that is because 16 Camp Woods is surrounded by, and I mean no disrespect to the area, a bit of a hodgepodge from a land use standpoint. 3 of your planners agreed with me. No one said, David, you're crazy. Why are you trying to rezone this? None of your village attorneys said, that's foolish. So we did look at doing that. Now, I'd have to defer to Linda and Jaime and possibly Joe on this, certainly Stuart. But my understanding is, for some political reasons, and maybe some others, one of which was one neighbor who didn't want to sign off on a zoning petition to change the zone, I was told, David, despite the fact that we really for years been trying to come up with a suitable solution, we're going to have to pursue a variance. No problem. I explained that to John and Lauren, and for the better part of 1.5 years, that's what we've been doing. I share that at the outset because as you all take a step back and analyze uniqueness, I've been doing this a long time. I don't normally have a municipality that issues a violation and does not shut down my client's use over a 7-year period. Now, what's the reason for that? In my opinion, and you don't have to agree with me, in my opinion, it's because John and Lauren have explained that this property has been used for decades. I don't know how long it's been used this way. The record's unclear. And I, for one, am certainly not happy that some of the information has dribbled out to my clients as property owners over time. I was shocked to see that in essence, for 61 years, somebody's been trying to turn that building into a 5-family, multifamily residential. I found it interesting, challenging, and ironic, but for 60 years, we're right back to the beginning of the circle. The same thing that woman was trying to achieve with her variance then, we're kind of still talking to you about. What does that say to me pragmatically? It says to me pragmatically, that building's probably been used as a multifamily residence for a very long time. It also says to me that my job, and I hope our job collectively, is to try to recognize that there are 4 families living inside that building right now. And I know I, for one, I'm going to do everything in my power to not see them dispossessed. Whether we all like what the situation, and there should be safety, fire safety, life safety. I don't question that for a minute. Linda and Jaime have both heard me say, if Joe's got to do something to make sure it's safe, neither John, Lauren, Jim, nor I want anything there that's unsafe. So that to me is like the sine qua non. That's the starting point. The contractor's yard, John's had been watching his dad for decades using that as a contractor's yard. I forgot, because this thing's been going on for so long, that I cited to you a year ago that Tom Barnes, I don't know if you guys all know Tom Barnes. I knew Tom Barnes when I was a young lawyer and he was the village attorney. Tom Barnes was a really smart, very capable village attorney in Ossining. I had found an article a year ago that Tom Barnes was quoted saying in 1995, the business on this property has a right to be there. I don't know why Tom said that, but I take it to mean that probably for a good 30, 40 years, maybe 50, 60 years, it's been used as a business. So my job, folks, is to try to work with you as cooperatively as possible, answering all the questions that you keep coming up with, and figure out if there's a way to put the Apollonios property into a safe and suitable box, because that's what your village has encouraged me to do. And then, whether you like it or not, they've kind of put that in front of you because your board is authorized from a legal standpoint to grant the variances. So let's go back. A year ago, Friday, October 14th, 2021, I applied for an interpretation that this was a pre-existing non-conforming use. You all heard it. You didn't think there was enough evidence. We were encouraged to come back and pursue a use variance. Some of your questions about a half an hour ago sounded like you may have forgotten that, and maybe not. February 10th, 2022, my clients did submit a use variance application with some detailed information about, let's just pretend we're going to use this property legally in accordance with the S75 zone. Jim Anacarico, our project engineer, did a study of how we might be able to do that. And we looked at trying to squeeze a residence in the back and keep the residential structure in the front. And then he did an analysis of knocking everything down and doing 2 structures on the property. We presented that to you. We presented information, plans, and financial data that my client supplied. And I was never told that you found it incomplete or insufficient. They concluded based upon that they would not have a reasonable return on the property if they tried to make it 2 lawful residential units. So we quite frankly think that we were able, certainly the Apollonios think that they were able to demonstrate to you, it really can't be used lawfully as an R75. There's a reason it's been used this way for 50, 60, 70 years. We were then told, and some of you raised some questions, I think, Madam Chair, you might have pointed to it, about some setback issues, and you all said there may need to be area variances. We were told, and on March 24th, we supplemented our application with a request for area variances regarding setbacks, coverage, height, and parking. That's in front of you, and that was presented to you. This has been going on so long, at least, some people may forget. And that was before you for a while, until we got to the point, because this matter really, in my opinion, was always about the contractor's yard. And over the last 6 months, it morphed into, no disrespect, Joe had every right to raise this issue. It morphed into an analysis of the building and the residences. And wow, there are 5 residents in there. That's a multifamily dwelling in a zone that doesn't allow it. You all are going to need to pursue a use variance for that structure. And that's why in September, last month, we submitted additional data on the use variance for the multifamily. So, Madam Chair, toward the end of your deliberations earlier, you referred to it as muddled. It's only somewhat muddled because as this has evolved, we've been presented with new issues, and as late as last week, presented with new information. and we are trying to deal with it as it arises. Please understand, and I hope and trust you do, the Apollonios have every desire and intention to be cooperative, and therefore they have charged Jim and my office with trying to be responsive. So as the issues arise, we're trying to address them. So let me try to talk about what you all started to talk about tonight. The chair raised the 1969 letter, absolutely true. I was surprised to then see the 1990 letter from the building department that didn't refer to the building as a two-family dwelling. Suddenly it was expressly referred to as a multi-family use. I don't know why Mr. Emmerich said that. It doesn't say two-family, and that's all I know. I am also clearly surprised that the use variance application from 61 just focuses on the residential structure and doesn't talk about what was happening on the property. All I can tell you is what I told you a year ago, and that's when my clients hired a historian to do the best they could about looking at old maps and information. Information from the 20s indicated that there may have been some kind of automotive or a use on the property at that time. Again, all I can do is make the best of the information I've got. John believes that based upon the information his dad shared with him as a child and growing up, and the information that Mr. DeSisto, the prior owner, shared with Mr. Carmelo Apollonia, the property has been commercial literally since the 40s, 30s, somewhere before 1950. All I can tell you is what I've been told, and I hope that we can try to use that maybe to some advantage of clarity. I then heard some information about the taxes. Tonight's the first time I heard that issue. It's a great question. I'm not certain that just because it may be, quote, somebody used the word commercial, that the taxes are going up. It's theoretically, it might be considered light industrial, and light industrial tax classification is frequently a lot lower than other classifications, but I'll leave that to your tax assessor to determine. If you all want to know what the taxes would be on this property, were the Apollonios successful, we will try to get that, and I would ask Jaime to help me get your tax assessor to respond to that in a timely fashion. You raised a question about the financials. If you all have questions about the financial information that's been supplied, let's try to have a dialogue rather than listening to all of you and then coming back 25 minutes later. John and Lauren supplied the financial information. If you've got questions for them about why they believe, based upon dollars and cents proof, they cannot make this property work without these variances, they have to answer that. They know they have to answer that. And if you don't like the information or the fashion with which they've provided it, please tell me, because I will make sure they give you that information. A question came up about conditions. It came up, and then later in the discussion, it came up again, and Jaime and Linda both chimed in that you have the right to impose reasonable conditions. I think one of your board members asked, do we have the right to say only 4 units can be inside the building? I would agree with Jaime and Linda that I think you do, even doing a use variance analysis, have the legal authority to impose reasonable conditions. Those reasonable conditions would relate to the residential building. They would also relate to the contractor's yard. And you had quite a bit of discussion about the fencing, the security, the back of the property. I want to say something again that I said at the outset. I'm unaware of anything on that property that's unlocked, unsafe, and that people can wander in there and get access to things. Jaime shared that with me today, and he knows what I said to him earlier today. I will say as a matter of public record tonight, and that is neither Jim nor I nor my clients are here asking to create an unsafe condition on that property. I certainly can't ask you to do that and would not ask you to do that. So if there are reasonable conditions about the fence, what has to be locked, where things have to be kept, that's the goal. Taking 2 steps backwards, back when I was dealing with Stuart Kahn and your 2 or 3 planners ago, and we were going to talk about a rezoning, the rezoning was always to put us in the NC2 zone. So John and Lauren's property would then go through a site plan approval that would lock in the uses on the property. So I've never said anything different for 7 years. These folks inherited a piece of property from his dad. It too is a bit of a hodgepodge. Our job collectively as land use professionals is to try to lock in the use and make it safe. So whatever we need to do in that regard, I'm prepared to do it. Jim is prepared to do it. We thought we gave you a site plan, and I'll let Jim speak to that if you have questions, that shows where the contractor's yard is going to be, where the buildings are, where the fencing is. And I think Linda helped clarify repeatedly. I think Jim was trying to show storage areas in the far back, not storage structures, but you all may decide to condition and say, we don't want anything back there unless it's totally screened. I leave that to all of you. We talked about the access, we talked about the fence. Again, Chair, this is the point in the meeting where you talked about the application being muddled. I'm happy to address it any way you want. I don't disagree that it's evolved. Again, from the applicant side of the dais, every time a pitch comes at me, I try to deal with it. And I have, with all due respect to your board and to your staff, I've had pitches coming at my head from different directions over a couple of years now, and we're trying to do the best we can. So I didn't know about the use variance decision until a week ago. I didn't know that we were being asked to pursue a use variance on the residence until about 2 months ago. I didn't know we needed variances until about 5 or 6 months, area variances until 5 or 6 months ago. When I entered this equation 7 years ago, it was about the contractor's yard. Nobody was squawking at that time about the 5 families, and it shouldn't go unstated, and I'm going to state it. There are 4 families plus his mom who live in that building. Of those 4 families, folks, I think John and Lauren, just by nodding, one of them's been there for at least 10 or 13 years, you told me, right? My job is to not see people dispossessed in the village of Ossining. I don't think yours is either, but I leave that to you. I may not necessarily say every one of those units is a perfect size, and if Joe and the fire department tell us that there is an unsafe condition, that's got to be addressed. If that means consolidating to 4 units, it gets consolidated to 4 units. I hope, and this is what I was told by your other village officials when they asked me to drop the rezoning and pursue this in front of your board, I hope we can figure out a way to maintain the status quo safely. That's what I'd like to do. And again, if something is unsafe or there needs to be something addressed, I heard today from Jaime, and I think Joe alluded to it, if fire safety measures have to be taken inside that building with regard to hallways, lighting, extinguishers, et cetera, I for one want to know. I'm not in charge of fire suppression on this team, and if there's something that has to be addressed, we're ready to do it. In terms of the cleanup, I can let John address that. My understanding is the property was cleaned up. Then there was a condition that may have arisen. The minute I heard about this, I think John immediately went out there. But one or two of you said, you know, is it our job to police this? No, it's your job, hopefully, to impose a condition on my client and make it expressly clear what's expected of my client. If my client drops that ball, that's my client's fumble, and they'll pay the price for that. But my understanding is the property has been cleaned up. I asked Jaime, as he mentioned earlier, I called him earlier and said, I read that comment and that disturbs me. Can you go out there and take a look? He wasn't, but I'm told it was cleaned up. We do have 4 families living there. I don't know whether John can control all of that. I can't imagine every one of your multifamily residential buildings in the village is always in a pristine condition, but I leave that to you and your enforcement folks. I think we can achieve something sensible in a resolution. I am prepared to work with Linda in crafting resolution conditions that lock my clients in and protect the village and protect the residents. And I was really pleased that Jaime, because I was chomping at the bit to say it when you raised questions about the neighbors. My understanding, Madam Chair, members of the board, of all the hurdles that I have had on this matter over 5 to 7 years, the neighbors really have not been our issue. I was told that by your village attorney. I was told that by prior village planners. I was hoping that all the neighbors would join in the NC2 rezoning. And again, even if nobody else wants to say it, I'm going to be the one to tell you that land use professionals in your village absolutely acknowledged and agreed that that area is anything but a pure S75. It's just not. There are other pre-existing non-conforming uses. It is a mixture of things. That doesn't mean it should be unsafe or unsightly. I'm here to work with you, your professional staff, and your planning board to make sure that this property is lawful and that it is clean and that it is safe. I hope you're going to give us a chance to do that. John and Lauren don't want to tell people to move out of that building. And John has been working on that property literally with his dad and his dad before him for decades. Whether you all want to believe it or not, I supplied you. I couldn't believe these folks found it, but they found an insurance policy from 1978. That insurance policy doesn't make my property lawful as a contractor's yard, but it does show that some insurance company collected money and wrote a declaration indicating 5, I repeat, 5 residential units and 10 parking spaces. Insurance companies don't write insurance policies and don't put on their deck pages 5 units when there's 2. They just don't. So I would ask you to assume the veracity of that document. And again, you've already told me you don't think this is a pre-existing lawful non-conforming use. I wish you did, because we could have gone home back in October of 21 with that, but you didn't feel that that was compelling enough for you. So we have attempted to work with you and your staff with the financial information and other material. I hope we can craft something, get the use variances on the 2 uses, get the area variances on the setbacks, the height and the coverage, and get our site plan approval that will lock in the fence, lock in the storage, lock in the safety, ensure fire safety, et cetera. And with that, I would love to have a dialogue rather than a monologue.
So I would like to add one small piece just to add to this. It was not in the staff report, but it was sort of alluded to some of the information. This was a T zone before it was an S75. So it is, for all intents and purposes, at a minimum, a legal non-conforming 2-family use. The paperwork lines up, the history of it lines up, the denial letter, the denial of variance lines up, that it was a 2-family at that time, and it was previously zoned as 2-family. So I want just to make sure that that is on the record. It's not in staff report.
And whatever happened after that happened without a variance, because we know the variance was denied.
Right. So
So that is,
I think that's one of our issues as we meet today, and I think that needs to be clear, that the use as it stands right now is not legal. So I think that in order to move forward, a lot of things need to be cleared up, and it's better to clear them up while you're before the board than to have to. So that's why we're asking all of those questions, and we're looking for that information. And again, we know information was given a year ago, but things change in a year. So getting up-to-date financials and getting, a bigger picture, I think would help us to move forward. I also think that, working with Linda and Jaime to get us a form or sheet or, like outlining all of the use variances that are needed and the area variances, because again, we can note by looking at some of the paperwork that a couple of the apartments don't fit the livable space. I just think that it's easier for us if we can see it all laid out than us trying to guess and kind of figure out and work it out on our own.
So, well, just to ask, to build on that question, Joe has sent a letter to the applicant requesting a fire safety inspection. Because multi-family. I'm so sorry.
I was walking down that road to not only do a fire safety inspection, but if there are 5 apartments, then there are other things that I think we would be comfortable in knowing, like, is there a lockbox for the fire department?
So those are all things that the
the
fire inspectors, yeah.
Yes. So I think that those are some of the things that we know, like, we're not kind of clear on, and I think it would be nice to know that information up front. And even if they do a fire inspection of the house itself, are there all the fire safety regulations in the back? With, fuel storage, oil storage, like, there's some things that I think are coming to the surface that we just like to get the information on so that we can make an informed decision on our end of the bucket.
So let's stay on that. Let's focus on that. No objection. If a fire inspection needs to take place, Jaime and Linda both know that we've talked about that over the last week, and I've said nobody's contacted my clients. So I've heard, Madam Chair, with all due respect, I've heard about this for over 7 days, and no one has reached out about that. So we're ready to do that.
Well, we
Um,
send a notice out to the address that we have on record. So if that's the proper address, then maybe the notice didn't get to the,
Unmute,
Okay.
unmute, Lauren, if you're trying to say something.
So I'm sure you're referencing that you sent it to Underhill in Yorktown Heights.
well, that's because that's what we have in the computer on the assessors.
I've called multiple, with all respect, I've called multiple times and have had the address, asked to change the address to 16 Camp Woods Road.
But that would explain why, you didn't receive it because it goes.
Previous times we've been on together, and I told you we've sold that house back in 2020. I called numerous times to change the address. We don't own that house
All right,
anymore.
so Lauren, I got it. Lauren. So
Yeah.
Madam Chair, for the record, I would ask that the Village of Ossining, in connection with this matter, please communicate with us officially at 16 Camp Woods.
We-
And
we
Linda and
will-
Jaime
we
have
will
been,
do
hang
that.
on, Joe. And Linda and Jaime have been wonderful. Again, I want to say that they've been very communicative, very open, and I very much appreciate that. So Joe, I would ask you to join with them. If there's anything you need, you know where to find me. I know you do. Please, even if you persist in sending it to Underhill, which we would ask you not to, that you just give
No.
us the courtesy professionally of sending a copy.
I will do so. The
Thank
reason
you.
why is because the secretaries in our office just printed out directly out of our computer, and in the system, it shows that address.
Understood.
So it
So let's go back to what we
automatically
were
was printed out for that. So we'll
Got
correct
it.
that.
So let's talk about the substance. We're fine with conducting that fire inspection, Madam Chair. I think it's a great idea. I've communicated that. We look forward to doing that. And if there are issues that have to be addressed, we're obviously going to have to deal with that.
One thing I do want to just mention to me, Mr. Steinmetz, is that in your presentation tonight, the only thing I want to answer to is the question that you had said that reason why the use has not been stopped by the village is because we issue violations, right? For uses, for anything, not specifically only in this case. And then when a person eventually doesn't, you get a certain number of days to comply with an order of remedy. And if the compliance did not occur, it goes in front of the town judge. So we don't have an authority to just say, well, we're coming out here and we're going to shut somebody's business down to the way they operate a property. The determination would have to be, if not by the town court, a Supreme Court. So, say the reason why the village is not shutting a business down or any operation down means that we're in agreement with something or not is really not correct, because we don't hold an authority to shut businesses down or shut any uses down. We can write violations. We can bring it in front of a town judge, and then it's really on the court system to make that decision in the end. We don't have the authority to just say, we could put notices up and say, not habitable, you're not permitted to have this particular business, but that's just a notice.
And
It has to go to a legal action. So
Joe, thank you.
It's not just to say that we're just saying we're in agreement that, use is allowed. We're just saying, without having to go through the process of what we're doing now with those variances.
Got it.
As you know, it goes to a legal process.
And so, Joe, thank you so much for clarifying. And you need not be defensive about the fact that the village has not shut it down, because it's not just your office and building department. This has obviously been going on, as we kind of see, for decades. But you made a really important point. While you issued a notice of violation, and this, Madam Chair, is the point that I was making earlier that may have been lost on some. No one has sought to bring an enforcement action in local justice court or otherwise over that 7-year period. And I'm not asking that to happen, but I'm pointing out.
There is an action pending as far as we know.
But they have held that, that is correct, but they have held that in abeyance while we were working cooperatively to try to address
It is
this.
being held because it is before the zoning board, so you have
Correct.
to understand the process. So that is the process here in the town village of Ossining.
It was being held prior to that, I believe, even before we filed the zoning board application, while we were having conversations with the village over years about the rezoning as well.
So I'd like to move on to a secondary point, which is that it seems the board has made clear that you would like to see modifications to the site plan. David has expressed, it sounds like he's a little reticent to do that. I do think it's still in the best interest that they provide a revised site plan that does accommodate better screening, that shows a smaller area based off of the comments that all of you have already provided. Present that back to the board. Yes.
So an issue that I'm having right now is we're trying to litigate all these points, but I literally have a list of things that I would like to ask you for. In lieu of those things, I cannot vote in the affirmative according to these 4 criteria. So I have a list. Is it better for me to just read it? Because if I can't give it to you today, I'm still gonna expect that the next time we meet you. And so we can litigate each point and go back and forth, having a conversation and disproving them, but
I think it's better that if Kyle has points that need to be addressed, this matter is not going to be, decided. So I think if there are issues that the board would like to bring up, that we give you all the issues and then at our next meeting, or between now and.
Let me suggest that you do it through, me and
Right.
Jaime.
That would be
So
great.
Send us your list.
Great.
And we'll put together a sort of, together with some comments we may have.
Great.
Some of the things we heard here tonight, and I think we
I-
heard
I'll
all the
give you-
concerns.
I'll give you one example, which talking about it won't satisfy anything tonight, so I'm not looking for an explanation, right now. But one of the points I would bring up, and I'll provide the list, so we're efficient and we're not here until 2 a.m. Yes. On the point of the hardship being self-created, which is one of the 4 criteria, you have conflicting statements. So one statement is, oh, we have this insurance thing for a 5-family home in 1930, which, and then,
1960, or 70.
no. it's an
78.
insurance Policy,
Yeah, it's 1978.
when they bought it. But again, you looked up an old insurance policy before and you're trying to use that as proof. Do you want to use that as proof? Because then that means that in 1969 and 1961 and in 1971, et cetera, when these issues were brought up, they were known and ignored for whatever the reason.
Different owners, they didn't buy. it.
Doesn't matter, yeah, it wasn't them, but yes, they were ignored.
Yeah.
Yes.
And his father purchased the property in 1978.
Which is exactly why I said that, because if in 1930 they didn't own it, you can't use that as a point to argue in the.
So the policy was
Sorry, I
1978.
keep saying 1930, all the way back. Okay, great, off of that one. So
I think I would, and Kyle, I know that.
I'll just provide it to them.
I think
Yeah.
one of the questions that I have, and Jaime can kind of clarify for the board, when it went from a T zone to a S75 zone, just so that we're clear that, the non-conforming residents for the 2 units, at what time period that happened, so that we're clear that
1960, I think.
I
No,
think-
it was,
No, I think
Because
the original 1930 is T-zone. It's effectively whatever T-zone was.
yeah, we looked at this one before.
We had the answer and it was, I can get you
But
the,
I don't think there's any question
Yeah.
on that, I mean, even
No,
though,
but I think
I
that
just,
because
no.
what they're trying to say is, at some point, they said it was a non-conforming, existing non-conforming with the 5 units. But at some point,
not legal.
it was never legalized,
Never
and,
legalized.
and it was never, and even though the zoning changed, it was never legal even when the zoning changed. So I
But-
think that's.
Right, it was a legal non-conforming.
For the 2
two-family.
units, right.
But
So-
getting back to what Kyle said before, though, is part of this also has that financials. And how can they figure out how much income they're gonna get from those 5 units if the fact that those 5 units may not be totally legal?
Yeah, so
So
they.
that's,
yeah,
that is,
So it's
Yeah,
being
false
taxed
finance.
as 5
Yeah.
units now, if it becomes less
Yeah.
than 5 units, your taxes go down, they're relying only on the taxes
yes.
in their financials.
okay.
So the correct, so
Yeah, I think what we can do is have a follow-up discussion, me and Lindy have discussion with David on sort of what we think might make for a better analysis, something.
Better.
Whose responsibility is it to just be like, here's a page with all these times and dates on it, because right now we're shuffling through.
Well, we can take the information we have. Right.
Okay.
kind of get.
And that way, when somebody goes back and forth and they're like, this date, we just look.
So
We'll give you a
the
timeline.
only other issue I had was you talked about moving from a 75 zoning position, you call it, S75 to NC2, would that solve this whole thing?
Not the five
No,
family.
not the five family.
No, it would solve the construction business, but then there'd still be a five-family house.
What's wrong with separating the property into pieces owned by the same people?
Well,
The configuration of the
It's gonna be
property
much-
doesn't lend itself to
Yeah.
the subdivision.
Well, yeah, so there's a couple of issues with that, but that's all.
Yeah.
It's just a different application.
Yeah.
Right, so that
Ultimately,
would be-
That's a lot
it's a
simpler
different
process.
If they want to
No.
propose that, then that's.
We have,
Yeah.
that's a different
And I-
application and it's a different process.
Yeah.
So it's,
And I think the
It would be
village
starting
didn't want to rezone it unless they were extending the line between the F 75 and
because you almost have to
62,
jump over
which
property.
incorporates another property in the middle, and that property owner.
I just thought I'd ask this.
Yeah.
Can can I respond for 30 seconds to the question about the NC2? Because
Yeah.
I just want to make it clear. I think I said this, but I want to underscore it. At the time that I proposed the NC2, the only violation and issue that had been raised for us was the contractor's yard. So it was my understanding in the discussions I was having with village officials that we were trying to solve for the contractor's yard. And in my opinion, the multifamily building would have become pre-existing non-conforming, having no idea at that moment in time that there was any allegation that it was an unlawful structure. My clients didn't know that, and we had not been cited on that.
The
Just
only,
wanted you to-
the only thing that would have been in the NC district is, if we remember, Mrs. Steinmetz, the discussion was also the NC district. Says you have to have residential use above commercial use, so the house being all residential, there would have been a variance requested also for a use variance for the first floor being residential. But it would have, that would solve the problem for multi-number families, because the NC district, you can have a commercial on the first floor and
Gotcha.
6
Thank
apartments
you,
above. But you're correct, the only thing in the NC district is the use of the yard still would not have been a permitted use in an NC district. It would need a variance for that.
All right.
Did I describe that properly?
So,
Thank you.
Okay.
so I think if I can,
So
I'm gonna let Marlene go.
I think we have a plan. You guys are all gonna get us. Get Jaime and me, all of your comments, questions. You don't necessarily have to repeat ones that have been raised here. We've got those. I can take the notes. We have the recording. But like Kyle's list and anything else that any of you.
I was ready before.
Yeah, the next step
I'm
report will be
gonna
in
have
longer.
Kyle's email tonight.
Well, and part of it is, I don't want them to be able to wait for the movie. The reason you're gonna keep getting back and forth is because we never spend the time to do this. So if I'll just make a list and send it, then I'll ask all my questions.
Right.
and You guys will get the benefit of it.
I think that makes sense that we're getting the information in one go instead of coming back and forth in this way.
Let's try to organize
Organize
it.
it.
a little.
Look, not for nothing, I do want to sort of co-sign what David said. They have been trying to work with the village, and the village has been trying to work with them, right? We're trying to come up with a solution that makes sense. And so, not speaking about sort of any enforcement actions or anything else, there has been active work over the, at least as long as I've been here, and most likely well before I got here, to try to find a resolution to what is a challenge, in
So-
fixing.
I have to stand with, Mr. Steinmetz on this. I have heard about this piece of property since I was a trustee in the village of Austin 100 years ago, so this is not new to me either. So I think that at this point, to get all the information together, to actually give us a chance to look at it in one package and to be said, these are all the questions we've asked, these are all the answers that we're getting. I think that would help us make informed decisions.
Yes.
And that's our whole point in getting here, is that we
Understood.
make informed decisions and not just kind of like guess and, or kind of make them in a bucket. So, I think at this point, what I'd like to ask for is another adjournment.
Yeah.
The public hearing is still open, so I believe that
There are, I don't know if David T or interested party or public waiting
Yeah.
to comment here.
There's, so you may want to open public hearing. to see, it is open, so you open it and then see if they want to make it, if not, then adjourn it.
Is there anyone in the public here to speak on this? The public hearing is still open.
You're not the public, Dave.
I know, I just didn't want her to close tonight without one more thing.
Public and not David.
I'm a member of the public, Linda. You may not want to recognize it, but I am.
Okay, if there is no one from the public attending tonight that would like to speak, no one on your email, Tiny? Okay, then we would continue to adjourn the public hearing portion of this.
We need to-
Well, no, I think, technically, you
You
didn't
didn't
open
even
it,
open it.
so you don't
so-
need to adjourn it, like, if you just
Yeah.
move right into adjourning the.
The matter.
The matter.
So,
David has something he wants to say.
yes, David.
Thank you all. Very quick. I was surprised this didn't come up at all, and I'm remiss for not having said it affirmatively. One of the things that resulted in this being delayed until September was we were asked by your board to get a phase 2 analysis of the property. That was
You know what,
important to
David,
you.
I spoke about the phase 2.
Yes. we
I
did
spoke
say
about the
that.
results
Thank
that
you,
it-
but We do have that.
Yeah, I did mention it early on.
Good. I wanted to make sure that was in the record. Thank you, Jaime. I didn't hear it.
Okay.
Yes, we do have that. So at this time, I'd like to ask for a motion to adjourn.
You have to unmute, Lauren.
05/2022.
I think you should tell them.
Oh, wait.
Hold on, Nate.
Wait, wait,
You
Lauren,
only wanna say something.
Lauren wanted.
Hi, just one quick thing. So I just want to address, we actually had a phone call today from our back neighbor. And he was like, had no complaints. Well, I was like, can you just put the fence up? Like, that's, I just want to let you know, like, that's our neighbor who called to say, like, can you just put a fence up? And then he, like.
The house that you guys are
showed,
looking at in
that
the
you
picture.
showed, he just said, put a fence up. That's
Yes,
all
we
I
did
want.
put the fence up.
Yeah,
I'm
I mean,
sure no
all
problem.
due respect, you need to consider the implications of this over time if the property gets sold to other people, to other neighbors. So,
We're looking at the
You'll see
property in
something else.
perpetuity.
yeah.
Yeah, so not just today.
Okay, I just want to let you know that was like that simple today.
I'd just like to remind the board, I know it's been a while, but, at the last time I was before you, I did go over all of the existing screening that's in place now and all of the proposed screening that we would propose as part of the site plan. In addition, that site plan did include, the separation as you guys had requested between the residential and the commercial part of the property. So I think all of those things, well, maybe not everything, but certainly a lot of requests that you had, I believe were addressed in the site plan. And I would ask the same thing, like Kyle mentioned, if you have other things that you want to see on the site plan or, things that concern you, if you could, if there could be some dialogue between Linda and Jaime and that gets to me, I'm happy to, put those things on the site plan. And one more thing, that fence that's in the back between the green area and the hardscape portion of the contractor's yard, that gate and that fence is existing right now. And to clarify again, those areas back there are not buildings, proposed buildings. They are just simply where items have been stored in the past. So happy to do that.
Again, all the information will be shared out and get back to us over the next month. Again, there is a motion to adjourn.
There is no motion, there is no motion.
Yeah, you need a motion.
Motion to adjourn the meeting.
Not the matter.
The
Oh,
matter.
oh my gosh.
Adjourn the matter.
Motion to adjourn the matter.
Second, Bob.
Any opposed?
Any opposed?
All right, so it's unanimous. Okay, so you want me to go really briefly over why the other items are not on the agenda?
Aye.
Thank you all.
Or you
Thank
can read,
you. Have a
you
good night.
can certainly read it in notes.
Thank you.
Keep it in mind.
Okay.
So DBA 15/2022, 65 Main Street is adjourned.
Awaiting the planning board secret determination.
Yeah.
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 And ZBA 2022 61 Dale Avenue is adjourned. The applicant has requested an adjournment to consider next steps. And if you remember, that is the lady with the stairs, on Dale Avenue, the whole thing running down.
Yeah, yeah.
with the whole thing.
With that second house on the back.
Yes.
Yeah.
The drainage building.
If there is no other business before the board, I believe I can ask for, to have you to adjourn the meeting.
So moved.
Seconded over.
Any opposition? No.
Yeah, we all was.
Okay, if there's no opposition, meeting adjourned. We look forward to seeing you again in November.
Kyle, I didn't get your email.
Huh?
Yeah, I didn't get your email yet.
Happy birthday.